Welcome to Green and Red, Scrappy Politics for Scrappy People, a regular podcast on radical environmental and anti-capitalist politics, brought to you by Bob Bazanko and Scott Parkin.
Hi, this is Bob Bazanko, co-host of the Green and Red podcast. Scott is away on a diplomatic mission, so I'll be going solo today, and I'm really excited to have a really great guest, someone we've talked to here before, one of the better journalists of our time, and that's Charles Glass. Charles was an ABC News Middle East correspondent from the Middle East, chief Middle East correspondent from 83 to 93. Has written for all kinds of major magazines, The Observer, Newsweek, Nation, New York Review, so forth, and is the author of several books, including Tribes with Flags, A Dangerous Passage Through the Chaos of the Middle East, The Northern Front in Iraq Diary, The Deserters, A Hidden History of World War II, Syria Burning, which is a book I used in my class many times, Soldiers Don't Go Mad, which was the previous book, and then most recently, Syria, Civil War to Holy War, which is obviously pretty important right now, given events in that region. So do you want to start just by talking a little bit about the new book and what prompted you to do it and what's happening there? A little bit of maybe background briefly.
Well, the last Syria book, Syria Burning, was written in 2015.
Right.
A lot has happened since then. It's 10 years. So this book is an update of that book. It brings the next 10 years into focus based on all the trips I made to Syria during those years. Getting into Syria was not always easy. It was quite difficult to get visas. Whenever I would finally be given a visa, I would go and write something and then come back. And I've assembled these things all in chronological order, following the course of the war up to my last trip, which was only last month.
So you got there, you were at Syria Burning in 2015, which is after the events of 2011. So the conflict was already going in Syria. What have you seen? What did you see? I know you wrote a piece, I think in early 2023, maybe in the New York Review about Syria, which was pretty kind of bleak. What did you see happening then? But at the time, I think you concluded that Assad was probably secure, that's what it looked like. What did you see then and what's happened since then to lead us to the events of last
Well,
month?
he was secure because the international alignment was very much in his favor. Iran and Russia were still strong. The jihadis were fighting amongst themselves. Turkey was more preoccupied with internal problems post the attempted coup against Erdogan. And so Assad was looking strong, but his popularity diminished considerably because of all the corruption. Businessmen who used to support him because he had shaken them down for money, lots of money, had turned against him. That they're an important part of Syrian society. People's jobs depend on their factories and their various businesses. So the popular mood was going very much against him in areas where, like Iraq, where he wasn't so much hated before. So the unpopularity was increasing. And then the international scene changed a lot. Hezbollah was wiped out in referendum by Israel. Israel demolished Iranian assets in Syria. Russia was preoccupied with Ukraine, was more interested in its relationship with Turkey than with its relationship with Assad. And in the event when the Hayat Tahrir Hashem, the main opposition jihadist group, moved south from Idlib, where it had been for many years, to Aleppo, and they found that they took Aleppo basically without fight. And energized by that, they moved south to Homs and Hama and ultimately into Damascus. And the regime forces wouldn't fight before Assad already had ordered them to. They dissolved. I mean, the soldiers were very badly paid. Officers were very badly paid. Some of the officers received money to throw up their arms. The soldiers were living on a diet of one potato. And Damascus was basically taken without a fight. First by jihadist forces from the south, from Daraa, who looted the city when they got in. But when Hayat Tahrir Hashem came, they restored order and sent the Daraa forces back to Daraa.
Uh, One thing that kind of on the left here, especially in the U.S., we talked about is the role of the United States in Syria, and then kind of have various kind of lefty factions in the U.S. who take different approaches. But what has the U.S. role been really since, let's say, 2011, just again, generically?
Well, at that time, the Obama administration sponsored two major programs to arm and train the opposition, many of whom were fanatic jihadis who went over to Islamic State and Al Qaeda in Iraq and so forth. Uh, that backfired very badly. The Islamic State took its caliphate in Iraq and Syria, and then the U.S. had to um, turn against people it had been helping in order to restore order in Iraq, where they had very strong vested interests, and that left Syria in some considerable chaos, um, and Iraq was able to restore its arm ultimately and throw the Islamic State out. The Islamic State units, small units, still exist in Syria.
Um, in the recent coup, overthrow, whatever, a lot of the factions that have come to power kind of were part of that. Were part of the Islamic State, right? Including Jelani, who was they had a bounty on his head. What does that kind of mean? How did they position themselves? Were they supported by any of the big powers?
Giuliani was very strongly supported by Turkey. All of his lines of communication go to the northern border with Turkey. The weapons and money came south from Turkey to him and other jihadist groups. He's not the only one. He's just become the main one now that he's in power in Damascus. And the Turks are supporting him very strongly. When I was there, the Turkish foreign minister came to see him. Turkish intelligence is cooperating with his intelligence. The Turkish presence in Syria is stronger than ever.
What's happening in Syria right now? I've seen some reports of kind of, I guess, army units or paramilitaries going through, killing people, rousting people. Um, if that's really happening, who are the kind of targets of this?
It is happening. Hayat Tahrir Hashem, Jalali's group, says that these are isolated incidents that they are trying to control. However, since I left Syria, I'm getting messages every day from friends who report on attacks on Alawi people, the sect Assad came from, on Christians. But when I was there in Damascus, there was great elation. People were happy that the Assads had gone. 54 years of that family rule had left a very bitter taste in the mouths of most Syrians. However, the signs are very hard, very, very hard to read. On the one hand, the Hayat Tahrir Hashem people in the streets, armed, are on very friendly terms with the population. Pat them on the back. They go to them when they have trouble. There seems to be great cooperation and enthusiasm. However, Alawis and Christians in outlying areas are being attacked. And whether or not Hayat Tahrir Hashem is doing anything about it is hard to say. Remember that the jihadist movement has been fighting really since the beginning of the rebellion in Syria in 2011. They never said they were fighting for democracy and equal rights for women and things like that. They said they were fighting to impose an Islamic state and Sharia laws. And many of those people, whatever Shirani says, still believe that. That's why they gave their lives. That's why they fought so hard. They believed in that cause. They don't believe in what Jelani is saying now. So he's going to have to deal with people who are opposed to the direction that he seems to be going.
Uh, One issue that's really of concern to a lot of people I know is the Kurds and Rojava. What is their status right now? How will this affect that?
Well, Turkey still attacks them regularly. The U.S. is there with having had 900 troops. Biden put it up to 2,000 troops supporting them. But on the other hand, they themselves, the Kurds, the YPG, are engaged in an ethnic cleansing operation along the Euphrates Valley. We get messages from villagers who are people that I knew in the past, whose houses have been burned by the Kurds, and they've been driving them out. So the Kurds are not just the angels in this.
Yeah. You also, a minute ago, you talked about kind of some of the powers that are involved in Syria. And you had a comment in one of your articles. It said Syria is the stadium where the grass, all the players play on us, Russia, the U.S., Iran, and Turkey. So you have this kind of, great power regional conflict, and we'll talk about Israel in a minute. I mean, but how is that playing out in Syria? It seems like that's kind of been a real problem, a real cause of all the friction, all the conflict.
Well, for the time being, Turkey is in the ascendant.
Yeah.
Russia still has two bases in Syria that it says it's not going to give up. Zelensky seems willing to negotiate with the Russians on that and let them keep the bases as long as they're not active against him. Um, the United States has the oil fields at Tanf in the south and the Kurdish areas in the northeast. And it's not clear whether Trump will withdraw those troops and let the Syrians govern themselves or maintain a presence and use the Kurds for some American purposes. And I don't know what those might be.
Uh, so Israel, obviously, is kind of the story in the region. How did Israel support this coup in Syria? And weren't there kind of Palestinian forces or resistance groups in Syria who were being kind of headquartered there, or at least given refuge there? And how will that affect any kind of support for Palestine now?
Well, there were hundreds of thousands of Palestinian refugees who were driven out of their homes in 1940 living in Syria. And many of them belonged to different Palestinian factions like Al-Fatah or Hamas or the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. They are still there, but they're not able to do anything at the moment. They supported the regime, so their popularity is a bit low at the moment. And Germany doesn't seem to be dealing with them or that. They're not acting militarily at all. Israel effectively brought about the circumstances that allowed this victory of Germany's forces by destroying Iran and Hezbollah in Syria and Lebanon. Whether that was their intention was to bring a jihadist group into Damascus isn't clear. However, once they did get to Damascus and the Syrian army dispersed, Israel then moved into parts of the Golan Heights that it didn't occupy already, thus violating the 1974 ceasefire agreement that Henry Kissinger had negotiated, moved into the buffer zone and above the buffer zone, taking advantage of the weakness of Syria to bomb all of the military weapons depots and missile sites in Syria so that Syria will have no air defenses and not be able to defend itself in any way.
Do you think that'll lead to a normalization with Israel, between Syria and Israel?
I have no idea. I think it's unlikely.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be an easy sell for Shalani
Yeah.
to normalize with Israel occupying so much Syrian territory.
But I mean, clearly this seems like it plays into Israel's interest, this new government.
Was taking advantage of the situation, the vacuum of power left by the departure of the Assadists and the disintegration of the army.
Yeah.
Giovanni has made many positive statements about Israel, saying he wants an agreement with Israel. He wants some kind of understanding. He doesn't want to fight Israel. He's trying to put the country back together. So he has no interest in fighting Israel this time.
You had a couple articles not long ago about Lebanon, I believe, in the Nation, and I don't know if you had just been there or not, but so we know that kind of Israel, especially invaded southern Lebanon, and this is a regional war. What do you see in Lebanon? What's the situation there?
Well, in Lebanon, there's a new president. In north of the Litani River, the Litani River is the demarcation between South Lebanon and the rest of it. South of the Litani River, the Israelis are still violating the ceasefire that they signed and the agreement they had with Hezbollah. They're demolishing villages. Yesterday, when some villagers tried to go back to the villages, the Israeli army killed them. They are demolishing houses and trying to leave a wasteland that is uninhabitable along the Israel's northern border, so that no Hezbollah people or even civilians were able to come home. But in the rest of Lebanon, life has what passes for normality. A corrupt government and electricity only a few hours a day and so forth. But the Lebanese were very adaptable, and people go to school every day, people go to work every day. Life seems.
I'm seeing different conflicting stories about the resistance in Lebanon, Hezbollah, whether they've been badly damaged, whether they kind of what's the status now of kind of any kind of resistance in Lebanon?
Hezbollah has been seriously
Oh.
decapitated. It's lost its leader. It's lost its senior leadership as well. It lost 1,500 people in one day when pagers exploded in their hands. Now, this was a serious decimation of Hezbollah's power, but it hasn't gone away. It still exists. It still has fighters. It still has weapons. It still has a political party with members of parliament. It's part of Lebanon. It hasn't been destroyed. It has been severely weakened.
Um, Israel and has just signed a peace agreement, a ceasefire. What do you think? Kind of what do you think the prospects of that are? The U.S. media is kind of cryptically pointing out that Israel is continuing to attack both in Gaza and in the West Bank. I mean, what do you kind of see happening right there right now?
Well, it seems clear that when Israel speaks of a ceasefire, they mean the other side has to cease fire. They don't cease fire. Hamas is supposed to stop fighting in Gaza. No one is supposed to fight in the West Bank, and Israel goes on attacking. And in Lebanon, Hezbollah is not firing, but Israel is. That is their idea of a ceasefire.
Well, you've been in this region for a long time now, and you were there in the '80s and during the wars there, during the I believe when the Marine barracks blew up. It- When you look back on that, kind of what's happened since then with these kind of several major wars and now Israel and a regional war. I mean, was that did you kind of see that coming? Were there signs already in place that nothing was kind of, getting better there?
I wish I'm not very, I'm very good at studying history, past, and living what's happening today, but what's happened tomorrow, I don't know. So if you'd asked me in 1983, say on October 23rd, 1983, when Hezbollah blew up the Marine barracks, where that was going to lead, I wasn't sure. I suspected it would lead to an American withdrawal. But after that, there was a period of chaos, terrible chaos, terrible fighting amongst the different sects in Lebanon for years. It didn't end until 1990. And Hezbollah emerged from all that as the strongest militia in the country. And it ultimately drove the Israelis out. In 2000, the Israelis finally had to withdraw, very reluctant, from Lebanon. And Hezbollah claimed it as a victory. It was a kind of victory, after which Hezbollah should have said, well, we won, and now we don't need a militia anymore. The Lebanese army can enforce the border, protect the border, and we'll leave it at that. But they didn't. They decided to follow the instructions of Iran, which needed Hezbollah as an armed asset and a deterrent against Israeli attacks.
What strikes me about 1983 is Reagan gets on the phone with Begin and in fairly strong terms tells him to get out.
That was 82.
82. Okay, that's right.
Yeah.
The point is, and Reagan and even Bush and Baker, were kind of a bit better, right? But especially, in the last 10, 12 years, we've seen an even more intense commitment to Israel, culminating in kind of subsidizing this genocide. I mean, the U.S. has always been pro-Israel. I'm aware of the levels of aid, but it does seem like it's taken on a different kind of intensity. I mean, especially when Trump became president. Is that kind of something that people in the region saw, or is that actually happening?
Well, everyone in the region, apart from Israel, was disgusted by Biden's enabling of Israel's attack on Gaza, and Israel, or Netanyahu, ignoring Biden's request that some of the killing in Gaza be moderated. Netanyahu just showed his contempt for Biden, and Biden, rather than try to enforce, wanted simply sent them more money and more weapons. Unprecedented, even by the scale normally to Israel. So that was increasing the suffering of the people in Gaza, the West Bank, and in Lebanon. So there was no trust. No one was sent to see Biden go. But Trump now, his public calling for the evacuation of the entire population of Gaza to Jordan, Israel, has massive ethnic cleansing. It's taken everyone by surprise, and it's for the approval of Israeli right, etc. But the rest of the region is appalled.
Yeah, I mean, aren't they? Well, legendarily, I don't know if it's true or not. Miriam Adelson promised him, I forget how much money, if he would clear out the West Bank, and that looks like that's kind of becoming the next target now.
Well,
Um,
from the beginning of Zionist colonization of Palestine, the goal has always been get rid of the people and take the land. This is just an acceleration of that process.
yeah, I mean, it's part of the settlement now. They're saying, these Gazans can go home, but is there anything to go home to? The region looks like it's just wiped out.
Well, that's because the Israelis not only bombed Gaza, they sent bulldozers in to demolish the houses after they bombed them. So then there's nothing. Of course, there's nothing to go back to. Not that's dead. That was Israel's policy. They wouldn't have to go back.
One thing we're noticing here, the U.S. media has been at its worst. I've never seen it act like this before in the last, especially since October of 2023. Has the European media been any better? Is it kind of actually discussing what Israel's doing? I know some of the governments there, Spain and Ireland in particular, have been critical of Israel, but is there kind of a different approach to this in other places? Is the United States really much worse and much more kind of myopic than everywhere else?
Well, the U.S. has a special take on Israel that isn't shared by the rest of the world. That's for certain. The papers that I look at, like El País or Le Monde, Libération in Paris, The Guardian in London, uh, tend to be fair in their portrayal of the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians. But in the U.S., that's certainly not the case.
Yeah. You mentioned a couple minutes ago how the people in the region were kind of fierce at Israel, but there's always, it seems to be this gap between the people who run these governments, who run these states, who are pretty repressive, and let's just call it the Arab Street for want of a better term. Is that getting worse now, where the people are really kind of supporting Palestine, but these governments outside of Yemen really are kind of staying away from it, or even kind of coordinating things with Israel?
Well, you notice that even when the killing in Gaza was at its height, none of the Arab states that have diplomatic relations with Israel even withdrew their ambassadors as a form of protest. Their citizens, most of their citizens in Jordan and Egypt, even in Saudi Arabia, have on their social media, insofar as they're allowed to use social media, and protested that their governments aren't doing anything.
And that's something you're used to seeing, right?
Well, there's always been a disconnect between the regimes, which is why there was an attempt at an Arab Spring many years ago, and the population who are not benefiting from the wealth of their countries. The elites that run the countries have such strong repressive and surveillance techniques, many of which are supplied by Israeli companies, by the way, and they can control.
I think, we're kind of getting to the end here. One last question. What are the material conditions like for the people in this region, like food, medical care? I'm assuming the infrastructure has been pretty wiped out pretty much everywhere now.
Well, in Gaza, all the hospitals have been destroyed. Hundreds of doctors and nurses have been killed. If you need an incubator for a baby, you're not going to get one. You need kidney dialysis, you're not going to get it. You're going to die. And many people are dying because of the lack of medical care in Gaza. In Lebanon, medical care is pretty good, both from the state and private charities. Syria, adequate. Saudi Arabia, excellent. It just depends on the country.
Yeah. You planning on going back soon?
Well, I just got back, so
Yeah.
not right away. No, actually, I take it back. I do have to go next month.
Yeah. Well, we're always looking forward to what you have to say, and good luck on the book. Is it already out?
No, it's out next week.
Next week. Okay. And that's from OR Books, right? I'll put a link in the notes about it. But I always appreciate chatting with you. Thanks so much for working around my schedule and doing this. I really appreciate it. And one last thing. The last time we talked to you, we talked about Julian Assange. I mean, that must make you feel better, right?
I'm very happy when he was set free. Yes.
Yeah.
He's now in Australia, recovering from years of incarceration.
Yeah.
He's with his wife and he has two boys, and seems to be doing pretty well. He's out of the public eye.
Yeah.
And he hasn't, as far as I know, reacted to WikiLeaks yet. But I hope he will eventually.
Actually, that's what I was going to ask you. I said it seems like he's kind of being private, and I just wondered if he was going to kind of re-enter that. So
Because I haven't asked him. I don't know.
yeah, but no, I thought of you when he was released because we just talked about that long before that. So that was some good news in a otherwise miserable year. So anyway, Charles Glass, who is was the ABC reporter, and I got to stall here to figure out the name of your book because I can't remember it. It's the newest book is Syria, Civil War to Holy War, which is an update of Syria Burning, which is a fantastic book I used in my class. So I'm looking forward to see what you added to this edition. So I really appreciate it. And take care of yourself, and we'll talk to you again, hopefully.
Thanks,
Um,
Buck.
this is Baba Zango from Green and Red Podcast, and thanks for listening and watching, and we'll talk to you again soon. Right. Let's see here. There.